My name is Rebecca Lell, and I was 30 for the morning I walked into divorce court ready to lose everything. My husband wanted the house. He wanted my company. He wanted both of our kids. And he wanted the whole town to watch him take them. His mother had spent 2 months telling our church that I was cold, that I was greedy, that I had driven a good man out of his own home. Most of them believed her. Then, just before the doors opened, my mother leaned close and whispered 2 words that changed everything. 3 months later, every Mercer in that courtroom wished they had read what they fought so hard to win. Welcome to calm drama stories. If you came for quiet women who know exactly what they're worth even when nobody else does, you're in the right place. Subscribe, because this one took me years to be ready to tell. I built my business on a folding card table in our garage. One client, a second-hand calculator with a sticky 7 key. I did books for a feed store, then a diner, then a dentist, and one by one, the small businesses of Marysville, Ohio, handed me their shoe boxes of receipts and their quiet panic about the IRS. By the time I was 30, Lowell Bookkeeping had a real office downtown, 2 desks, and my name on the glass door. I kept the original brass key on my ring, worn smooth from a decade of opening up at 6 in the morning. People thought they knew exactly what I was worth. They were wrong in both directions. I was the accountant who caught fraud before the bank did. The friend who quietly covered a payroll gap. The wife who balanced a household and a company and never once asked anyone to balance her. I was good at carrying weight. So good that nobody, including me, ever stopped to ask what it cost. Grant Mercer was charming the way a salesman is charming. He could make you feel like the most important person in the room and forget your name by the parking lot. The real trouble started 3 years before the divorce, when a side venture of his collapsed. He came to me white-faced at the kitchen table, and I did what I always did. I moved money from the business quietly, cleanly, and made the problem disappear before it reached his credit or his pride. What I got in return was a slow, simmering resentment I didn't recognize until much later. A man like Grant can forgive almost anything except being rescued by his wife. He started saying things that sounded like jokes. You always have to fix everything, don't you? Must be nice being the smart one. He had decided somewhere in that humiliation that my competence was a kind of control. He never said thank you. He just started keeping score. The signs were ordinary, late meetings that ran later. A cologne I hadn't bought him. His phone always face down, buzzing on the nightstand like a trapped fly. I didn't snoop. I have spent my whole career around other people's secrets, and I know the difference between watching and stalking. So I just noticed, the way you notice a leak by the stain on the ceiling long before you find the pipe. Vivian Brandt kept turning up. The real estate agent who'd sold us our house, polished and pretty, always somehow at the same gas station, the same coffee shop. I told myself I was imagining things. Then one afternoon Grant's phone lit up on the counter while he was in the shower, and a single message slid across the screen. It wasn't a love note. It said, find out what her dad actually left her. Not I miss you. Just a cold little question about my inheritance from a woman who already knew which curtains we had. I stood in my own kitchen and understood that whatever this was, it had stopped being about a marriage. It had become a project. And somewhere out there, 2 people were doing math about my life while I was still pretending the marriage could be balanced. They had already started counting. So had I. Here is what I stood to lose, so you understand why I didn't sleep. The house on Plum Street where Hannah took her first steps and Cole lost his first tooth. The business with my name on the door. My standing in a town small enough that the woman who bags your groceries sits 2 pews behind you on Sunday. And the trust of 2 children, 9 and 7, who still thought their parents were a team. But there was one more thing. When my father Walt died 5 years before, he left me around $180,000 and a parcel of land outside town. My father had been a bookkeeper too, and he had been burned young by a partner who walked off with everything. He taught me one rule before I could drive. Money has a memory, he'd say. Keep one. He meant keep what's yours separate. Never let your accounts blur into someone else's. When his money came to me, I did exactly that. A single account, my name only, never touched by anything marital. Every deposit documented in the same green ledger he'd handed me at 16, his blocky handwriting still in the margins. Separate, keep traceable. I had followed that rule my whole life without ever needing it. I didn't yet know it was about to become the only wall standing between me and ruin. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered to my office so the whole street could watch. Grant wasn't just asking for a divorce. He wanted the house, half of Lowell bookkeeping, and primary custody of Hannah and Cole. His lawyer was Trent Mercer, Grant's cousin on his mother's side, which told me everything about whose idea this was. My attorney, Maddie Ackefer, had a calm, dry way of talking that I trusted immediately. After I laid it all out, she asked one question, quiet and precise. "Rebecca," she said, "did you ever put your inheritance into a joint account?" "Never," I told her, "not once." Maddie set down her pen, "Then they're chasing ghosts. Under Ohio law, an inheritance kept separate and traceable stays yours. Same with a business you own before the marriage, if you can prove it never got commingled." Then she leaned forward. "But here's the part you won't like. The law being on your side doesn't mean the fight is easy. Their whole strategy is to bet you got sloppy somewhere over 12 years. And while they bet, they'll make you bleed." She was right about all of it. Carol Mercer didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She was 64, silver-haired, the kind of woman who brought homemade pie to every funeral and remembered your children's birthdays. And when a woman like that lowers her voice in the church kitchen, people lean in. She told them I was cold, that I'd kept Grant on an allowance. That no wonder the poor man looked elsewhere when his own wife treated him like an employee. She never said a fair. She had a gift for letting other people draw the cruelest conclusion while her hands stayed clean. Within 2 weeks, conversations stopped when I entered a room. A woman I'd done taxes for at cost crossed the street rather than say hello. Then Grant used the kids as leverage. He'd never been the parent who knew the pediatrician's number or which one hated crusts. Suddenly, he was Disneyland dad, showing up with a new bike for Cole, promising Hannah a horse, letting them believe their mother was the obstacle. I found out when Hannah came home quiet and asked in that small, careful voice kids use when they've heard something they shouldn't. "Mom, are we poor now?" I knelt down so we were eye to eye. I did not cry. I did not say one word against their father, but I made myself a promise right there on the linoleum. That night, I called Maddie and asked how to protect them properly. We requested a guardian ad litem, a neutral person whose only job is to look out for the children's actual interests. I kept their school the same, their bedtimes the same, their soccer the same. Stability, Maddie told me, is its own kind of evidence. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing in a current, holding two small hands, refusing to let go while someone tried to pull them downstream with toys. Then I did what I always do when the numbers stop making sense. I audited. I pulled our joint mortgage records, ones I had every legal right to see, and I found that Grant had quietly refinanced the house on Plum Street 4 months before filing, taking out a home equity line of credit. He had drained nearly every dollar of equity we'd built in 12 years. The money had gone into a property flipping venture with Vivian Brandt listed as a partner. And to fund it, Grant had signed a personal guarantee, putting his own name on the hook for the entire debt. I sat in my office with the green lamp on and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, clarity. He thought he was loading himself up with assets. What he was actually loading himself up with was liabilities. He was fighting to win a pile of debt with his own name guaranteeing it. He just hadn't read his own paperwork closely enough to know it yet. Maddie laid the whole board out a week before the hearing. 2 of their 3 legs we kick out from under them, she said. The company is separate. The inheritance is traceable. Your documents are airtight. But the house, the cars, the furniture, those are marital, and Grant has every right to fight for his share. So we fight for the house, I asked. She tilted her head. We can. Then she pulled out the appraisal and the debt figures and ran the numbers, and I watched her face change as the total landed. The equity in the house on Plum Street was gone. Not low, gone. And then some, once you counted the debt strapped to it. Whoever won that house would inherit the mortgage, the drained equity line, and the personal guarantee attached to it. The marital assets Grant was fighting so hard to take were worth less than nothing. My mother's voice came back to me quietly. Let them carry the load they fought for. And for the first time, I understood exactly what she meant. The prize they wanted wasn't a prize. It was a trap, and they had built it themselves. They made one last play before the hearing. Trent reached out with a settlement offer dressed as generosity. If I'd sign over my interest in the business, they'd go easy on spousal support. Maybe let me keep the smaller car. It was a trap with a bow on it. The company was already mine, separate property the law would protect. The only way it could ever be split was if I voluntarily signed it into the marital pot myself. They couldn't take it. They needed me to give it. They wanted my signature far more than they wanted the truth. At the meeting, Trent slid the papers across the table, and with a performance of reasonableness, asked if I'd hand over the office keys as a gesture of good faith. Out of pure habit, my hand went to my purse. My fingers closed around the brass key, worn smooth from 12 years of 6 a.m. mornings. I set my hand on the table, then I stopped, drew it back. Key still in my fist. No, I said, just that. Trent's smile flickered. He hadn't expected the quiet one to say no. I left the papers unsigned on the table and walked out with my key in my pocket, and I understood finally exactly which of us was bluffing. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like floor wax and cold coffee. The Mercers were already there, and they were not nervous. They were celebrating early. Carol sat ramrod straight in her good coat. Grant stood with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man about to collect a check. Vivian had come, of all the nerve, murmuring something behind her hand, and I caught the word curtains and I almost laughed. My mother sat beside me. She took my hand. Her fingers were warm and dry and steady, and she leaned close and whispered the two words. Give her everything. That was it, just that. Give Vivian, give Carol, give Grant, give the whole laughing lot of them everything they'd come to take. And in that second, with my mother's warm hand around mine and my father's ledger packed in the folder on my lap, I finally understood her completely. She wasn't telling me to lose. She was telling me to let them win the exact thing that would ruin them. The doors opened. I stood, smoothed my navy dress, and walked in to do precisely what my mother said. When the judge turned to the marital home, Trent launched into his rehearsed demand, and I simply nodded to Maddie, who rose and said in a bored, almost generous tone that my client did not contest the marital home and would sign over her interest in it entirely. Trent stopped mid-sentence. He'd loaded a cannon to knock down a door that was already open. We went down the list. Cars, his. Furniture, his. Savings account, his. Everything visible, everything shining, everything they had spent months and a town's goodwill fighting for. I signed with a steady hand and a calm face, and with every signature, the Mercers grew more openly delighted. Carol actually reached over and squeezed Grant's arm. Vivian sat up straighter in the gallery, already redecorating. They thought I was broken. I let them think it. Eyes down, pen moving, the picture of a defeated woman doing the only thing left to her. The only thing I held back was the company, and when Trent tried to fold it in, Maddie produced the LLC documents, dated and certified, and the judge glanced at them and moved on. Nothing there to argue. Through all of it, I kept one hand in my lap, and in that hand, hidden, I held the brass key to my office. Smooth and warm now from my grip. They could have the house they could see. They could not have the thing I'd built, because that was never theirs to take. They signed the agreement before anyone read the appraisal. They signed in triumph, all three practically beaming. Then Maddie stood up to address the financial record, and the temperature in the room began to change. She submitted the certified deposit history for my inheritance account, 5 years of it, sealed by the bank, every dollar traceable to my father's estate, never once mingled with marital funds. The judge reviewed it and nodded. mine, untouchable. Then she turned to the marital home, the one the Mercers had just so eagerly accepted. And she entered into the record the refinance documents, the drained equity line, the current appraisal. The numbers were read aloud. The equity was gone. And then the last document, the one that did it. The personal guarantee Grant had signed, securing the venture debt against himself and against the very house he had just been awarded. Maddie set it down and folded her hands. "Your Honor," she said, "my client has agreed to assume the marital home and all associated obligations. We have no objection." The silence in that room was total. I watched it move across their faces like a shadow crossing a field. Trent grabbed the appraisal. His expression collapsed inward. Grant leaned over his shoulder, and I watched the color leave his face as he understood, finally, that the house he'd fought for was an anchor. That the debt he'd hidden so cleverly was now his alone, secured by his own signature, attached to a property worth less than what was owed on it. He had won every single thing he asked for. He had won a mountain of debt with his own name guaranteeing it. I sat with my hands folded and my voice unused, because I had not needed to say a word. Then Carol came apart. In a way I had never once seen in 64 composed, pie-baking, pew-sitting years. She was on her feet, her sweet church voice gone, replaced by something raw and ugly. She turned on Trent first. Then on Grant. And the things she said to her own son were worse than anything she'd ever whispered about me, because they were true, and they were cruel, and they were in front of everyone. Grant spun toward the gallery, looking for Vivian. And Vivian was already on her feet, already moving toward the doors, her face shut like a bank after closing. The judge banged his gavel. The whole Mercer side of the room dissolved into exactly the kind of public scene Carol had spent 2 months accusing me of being capable of. I sat perfectly still through all of it. When the room finally quieted, the judge turned to the matter of the children. The guardian ad litem's report was plain. Through every month of this, one parent had kept the kids' lives steady, school the same, routines unbroken. The other had offered ponies and lived out of a suitcase with a woman the children had met twice. Custody went to me, primary and clear. I felt my chest unlock quietly, the way a held breath finally lets go. Vivian didn't make it to the parking lot before it ended. The house she'd helped Grant fight for was an underwater debt now, and a man tied to a guaranteed loan he couldn't pay was not the asset she'd come for. She walked to her car without looking back. Her great fear, the one she'd named to me once in a grocery parking lot, the terror of reaching her age with nothing, had just become her own doing. Then Carol found me in the hallway, composure hastily reassembled, wondering in that reasonable tone whether we might revisit some of this, whether I'd really want the house and its troubles, whether we couldn't come to a family arrangement. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the brass key one last time. "No, Carol," I said gently, the way you'd correct a child. "I'm keeping what I built. You can keep what you fought for." Then I picked up my folder, took my mother's arm, and walked toward the doors. The rest came the way real consequences come. Slowly and then all at once. Within 8 months, Grant couldn't carry the house and the loan strapped to it. It went up for short sale, sold to strangers for less than the debt against it. The personal guarantee followed him into his credit and his future. Vivian moved on. The venture folded. And Carol, who had run her quiet campaign through the church kitchen and the women's circle, found that small towns have long memories and a sharp sense for who was actually in the wrong. As for me, I kept the office with my name on the glass door. The clients who drifted during the gossip drifted back, a little sheepish, and I took them without a word about it. A grudge is just another debt, and I decided not to carry that one. Within the year, I bought a small house on the east side of town. 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, paid for with my own separate, traceable money. Hannah picked the paint for her room. Cole claimed the yard for a future dog. I left a lamp on in the hallway every night, the way I always had, and for the first time in a long time, the home it lit was entirely, unmistakably ours. People in town still ask me sometimes if I lost everything in that divorce. The house, the marriage, the standing. I always tell them the same thing. I gave her everything. The house, the cars, the whole bright pile she'd already started decorating in her head. I signed it all over with a smile. She just had no idea what everything was actually going to cost her. The name Lel is still on the glass door of my office downtown, a little brighter than it used to be since I had the lettering redone. It's on my children's school forms, on the deed to a house I paid for myself, on the ledger my father handed me at 16. I didn't just keep my maiden name. I kept everything that name was ever attached to. Here's the only thing I learned worth passing on. Walking out with less in your hands doesn't mean walking out with less. Not if what's left is finally, fully yours. Keep your own records, keep your own name, and if you know a woman who needs to hear this, share it.